Welcome everyone to the award-winning podcast Virgo and the Freak. I'm your award-winning host, the glorious League Freak, and I'm joined by award-winning guest Elliott Richardson from oneeyedeel.com. Thanks for joining me, Elliott.
No worries, mate. I'm not sure what award I've won. I probably won, best and fairest at some point in my very amateur sporting career, so I'll take it.
No, we collectively, as a podcast.
Oh, collectively, right?
Collectively,
okay.
Yeah. And
every guest that comes on.
Yeah, they get to claim some of it. That's fine.
All right, I'll claim it then. I'll take award-winning podcaster.
We won the best logo.
Best logo.
Yeah. It's the coveted one. It's the one you want to win.
Yeah.
So there's been a lot going on with the Parramatta Eels over the last probably couple of months since they lost the semi-final to Penrith. And they maybe had a week and a half out of the spotlight, but the last couple of weeks they have really been under the pump from the media and probably some of their fans, it's fair to say. And I think it all comes down to two questions. Number one, do you feel as though the Parramatta Eels are on the right course and they should, and they're close enough to a premiership win that they just need to make a couple of tweaks or almost stay the course? And the second question is related to that, which is number two, are they doing the right thing over this off-season in terms of their recruitment and the players that they have managed to re-sign and the players that are going to leave the club in 2023 for the most part? And they're two very simple questions with very complicated answers.
Yes.
How do you feel overall as a Parramatta Eels fan about where the club stands right now? And do you think that they're on the right path?
So to answer your first question about if I think they're close to a premiership, that's hard to answer because I don't like to get my hopes up too much because if you're a Parramatta fan, that's happened too many times. Mm-hmm. It's the most consistent they've been since the Brian Smith era, which got pretty bloody close to a premiership. Mm-hmm. I was looking earlier in this season that the Eels are the only club since the start of 2019 to not spend a single week out of the top 8. So that's including Melbourne and the Roosters. They didn't manage that. So when I looked at it, the Eels are then alongside the Roosters and Melbourne if you were to remove the first 3 rounds of the competition where, you have a couple of teams that are out of the 8 on differential or something, or you like Melbourne, they lose the first 2 games, but they go on and win 19 consecutive after that. Mm-hmm. But, that's very, very pleasing to see that they're one of the most consistent teams in the competition. And that then builds into, looking towards a premiership. The squad they've got, I don't think that there's anything glaringly poor about it. Previously, we've been able to go, our bench rotation isn't good, or there's some weakness there in the forwards. I think the major thing for the team is their mental resilience and mental toughness, and that obviously got impacted during the season. They had a couple of big blowout losses, which, didn't completely derail the season, but I think it probably knocked their confidence down a bit. And the other thing I would say that I see the club did address some of that. They didn't fall in a heap during the finals like they did the previous 2 seasons where they ran into Melbourne and just got taught about finals football. That didn't happen this time. They took it to Newcastle and were prepared to play to the 80th minute, and they took it to Penrith and they played to the 80th minute. And that's mental. That's not your physical capability there. That's just Penrith. They'd been to the grand final the previous season. They'd had some guys that were fairly fresh, and Parramatta tried to get. I know what we discussed in the lead up to that match, which coach had done the right thing. Brad resting a good chunk of his team against Penrith in the final round, and Ivan Cleary playing his side. And there was some discussion about whether or not he should have played Brian To'o in that game, given his problems then against Souths with his ankle. But I think both coaches they knew their team. They knew what was going to work for them. I liked it from Brad, and I know I said that because it showed that he'd learnt from previous seasons. And the other thing I think the Eels have addressed, and this kind of came up towards the end of the season, then after the finals, was stagnation with Brad's supporting coaches, assistant coaches. And so they've brought in Paul McGregor, Michael Ennis, and who's the Simon Wolford is the other one. So as far as I'm aware, they haven't released any coaches. So they've still got, apart from Andrew Johns, who's gone back to Newcastle, but he was only there as a consultant anyway. But, that's some additional brain power there. And whilst Paul McGregor's kind of been memed a bit as being a pretty poor head coach, and he struggled a bit with St. George, particularly towards the end of his term there, he's known as quite a good assistant coach. And he's been a New South Wales assistant coach. He's been around a bit. He's played pretty high level. He played Origin. I think for Paul McGregor, it might just be a case of he's one of those guys who's a really good assistant coach. He might not be quite cracked out for the top job, but I saw that as a really positive thing. And Simon Wolford's had some head coaching experience in England. I think in the lower tiers there, so he hasn't coached at Super League level, but he's had to fight it out in League One. I think is their second tier. And that's hard. You don't have a lot of money to spend. You're dealing with guys who are semi-professional, and you've got to get the best out of them whilst also balancing their real lives, which is a big challenge for a coach. To have him come in with his experience, not just as an NRL player, but as a head coach, is big. And Michael Ennis, he's been a consultant, I think, for the Raiders, and I think he's at Cronulla too when he finished up his career. And I've got a fairly highly, he's fairly highly regarded. And I just think that's something we needed. If you weren't there wasn't going to be a massive turnover of your top 13 or top 17 players for next year. The change was going to have to come in the back office. So I think they've done that. I think they're in the best position they're going to be in for a while in terms of next season. You've got Moses, who's got Origin experience now. You've got a forward pack that is among the best in the competition in terms of their ability to get up the field. I feel like there needs to be a bit of polish there at the end of their sets. But again, that's something you could probably address in an off season. I think a lot has been made about Dylan Brown. I think a lot of people forget that he's had a very disrupted start to his career. I think he played 3 games in his debut season. Then he had the stress fractures to his back. Then in 2020, he had a syndesmosis injury, which put him out for, I think, another month. And last season, he had the suspension for 3 weeks. And then tossed into there, you had Mitchell Moses with his broken back. You've had Reid Marnie with his shoulder. So I think in total, our 4 spine players have only played something like 40 games together. And that being said, too, we also tried to unlock Dylan a bit earlier in the season by shifting the side he was on, and it didn't seem to fit. And it actually seemed like he was much more comfortable once they swapped him back around to the other side of the field. And
I always feel with Dylan Brown, he feels like the player, if he can come into a final series playing good football, he's the one that's going to be the difference. Because, with Mitch Moses, we kind of know what he can do to a certain extent, but you also know that if he's not setting the world on fire, he's just okay. Whereas Dylan Brown's got the ability to take over from him, take over some of those playmaking responsibilities. And I guess it's almost like, when you've got Mitchell Pearce in a side, you kind of want a playmaker next to him that can do certain things and take the team to the next level. And I feel as though Dylan Brown's that player for the Eels.
Yeah, he took some more responsibility on towards the end of the year. There's a lot of pressure on Mitch from defenders getting to him because his kicking game went to the next level. I think he's at that level now. You hear Peter Sterling talk about a good half. His bad game's a 7 out of 10. Well, that's Mitch Moses now. His bad game is a 7 out of 10. But Dylan really got involved in the kicking game towards the end of the year, and he doesn't have to kick 500-600 meters like Mitch does. He might only have to kick 100, but if that's 3 or 4 kicks that Mitch doesn't have to make from distance, and they're good kicks, he's taken that load off. He's also got that ability to break a game open. We haven't seen a lot of it, but there were instances. There was one against the Roosters there where he killed the game off, and he just drifted to the right hand side. I think it was a left foot or right foot step, a palm, and he's just too quick for James Tedesco. I think a lot of people, we haven't seen a lot of Dylan breaking the line and breaking tackles, but he always seems to make headway when he goes into contact. And he's also a type of player. He seems very instinctual, But in saying that, he's not a pure, like, he's not like an Anthony Milford type player where he kind of thrives on the unstructured nature of football. He's very much, he can fit into your system and then break out of it. So obviously I want to see a lot more from him next season. The interesting thing that's been discussed on One-Eyed and a few other Eels fan sites is what would it look like if he moved to fullback and Gutherson into the 5'8" role? Because Gutherson's played 5'8" before. He's not the fastest player around, but his passing game is really improved, and he's got a kicking game. And the way the game's being played now, you kind of need your fullback to be able to get defenders to hold off, committing to the half. And I think that the way that we currently play is people know Gutherson isn't going to beat you with his speed. He's strong, but he's not really going to, he doesn't have a great step, so he can't really use his strength to stand you up because he can't get his body to the outside shoulder faster than the defender can adjust. Whereas I see Dylan Brown can. He's obviously got the fitness and the defensive capability out the back to do what Gutherson does. In saying that, I don't think the Eels are going to do that because Dylan's been an out and out half his entire career since I've been watching him play in the under-20s for us. He's always been playing at halfback or 5'8", so I can't really see him moving into the fullback role, and particularly when we've got Hayes Perham playing reserve grade for us, who, as he showed against Penrith, he's got some good footwork about him. He's got some good speed. He's got some good skill. So he could be a player that we keep a big eye on over the next year or two to see how he develops, because he's just one of those players who I reckon if you get him fit and you get a good run of games out of him, he can be quite a damaging player to bring into a squad.
Are you comfortable with, because the Eels are all in on Gutherson, like they've just re-signed him to it's going to be a sizable deal because he is the club captain, and there was a lot of noise about him going elsewhere.
So the Gutho thing, that really
are you comfortable with the Eels being all in on him? Because I look at him as a fullback, and as you say, he's not going to beat you with his pace or his footwork or his strength. And he does bring in a kicking game. He brings in a bit of a passing game from fullback, and that's good when you're attacking the line. But I don't know. I just think he's not. I don't think most teams are worried about him for the most part. And I've said that I think the Eels would be a really scary team if they had an attacking fullback like a Dane Laurie that's at the West Tigers. But are you comfortable with it, him being, the club being like all in and paying him and presenting him like he is one of your star players?
Well, I mean, he is one of our star players. I'm not sure how all in the club is, to be honest with you. He was angling for a longer deal and we didn't offer it. He was angling for a 3-year extension on top of his current deal, and we gave him a 2-year extension, which I think equates out to a 3-year contract in total, whereas he was looking for 4 years. And I don't think he got the money he was looking for either, because no one else was prepared to pay it. So I think the club has pegged him at a certain level, and they're not going to go above it. I also think that the club reckons they've got a couple of good young guys coming through. I think we've got 5 players in the emerging Blues squad this season. So that's at under 18s level. So I can imagine you're going to see those guys come through. I'm not going to say that, the recruitment and retention team's got this 5-year plan or something, because who knows what they're looking at down the line. But I reckon this could be Gutherson's final contract with Parramatta. Just hang on a sec. My chair's just dropped.
You're right. We haven't had that happen on the podcast yet.
Yeah, my chair's dropped and it dropped me below the mic. I think this might actually be his last contract with the club, because you think about this contract takes him past his 30s. You don't see too many fullbacks at the elite level past their 30s who stay at fullback and stay at the money that he's getting paid. And I also think, the club will be looking probably to try and find that diamond in the rough, or, have a junior come through who can play fullback, or it could be Hayes Perham, who's I think only 22. So in a few years, 3 years time, mid-20s, if he's still at the club, then he might be the option there. I was more wanting us to bet everything on Reid. that's the one that's really hurt, and I think hurt a lot of fans, is that, first of all, he's gone for the money. So I know footy is a business, but from what I understand, we weren't that far away from matching the deal that the Bulldogs tabled. Not only that, the Bulldogs didn't want him 5 years ago. So they released him, said, get out of here, you're not going to make the NRL. And then we're the one who threw him the lifeline and turned him into basically an origin player. If he doesn't get injured this year, he's playing for Queensland. The other thing is, I wasn't too upset when we released Marata and Ice Papali'i. Marata's like, he's the guy you don't overpay. Right?
I agree. When I heard it, he was one of those ones I was like, whatever.
A lot of people going, we should have kept him, and I kind of went, no. You're not paying $500,000 a year for a player whose main job is to run the ball hard and tackle hard. Mm-hmm. Let's be honest, that's mostly his job. He played in the centers when we needed him, but he's a run the ball hard type of guy. He plays on an edge, can play in the middle, but you're not breaking the bank for him. And the Papali'i one, well, I don't think he's worth what the Tigers are paying him for.
I saw you say something interesting on Twitter in that he's had one good year in his whole career, and he's only young, given that. And it was a contract year, and I completely understand that thinking, and it's a risk, and it's a risk some clubs have to take. They've got to roll the dice, and in the West Tigers, they've got to grab out any talent they can get at the moment. And that risk isn't the same level for the Parramatta Eels. No.
So Parramatta, from what I understand, still tabled him a pretty competitive offer. Like, it wasn't, we just said, he's $400,000 and you can take it. It was quite a bit more than that. Mm-hmm. But also with Ice, he's young. He's had one good season though. He was pretty average at the Warriors. Mm-hmm. The Tigers are taking a punt on him, and if it's for what that's been rumoured, right? He's getting paid more than what Crichton's getting paid, Payne Haas and Victor Radley. Mm. Payne Haas is on like $600,000, and apparently Ice is getting paid more than that for this new contract. Now Haas probably get an upgrade in the next year or two, which will take him above it, but still, Payne Haas has had raps on him since he was like 18, 19. Yeah. He's basically played Origin since he came into first grade, and the Broncos didn't sign him for more than what Ice has signed for the Tigers. So I was prepared to retain Ice for the right price, and obviously the Tigers have offered more. Okay, that's the nature of football. And one of the things I wrote on One Eyed is that we'll talk about, losing Papali'i, and you got to keep those type of players. Well, you don't really. You look at Melbourne, and across the past 20 years, they've released Jeremy Smith, Adam Blair, Ryan Hoffman, obviously now Felice Kafusi, and there's one or two more high quality back rollers that they've released.
And we're in an era of there's so many good forwards. Like, even if you look at Penrith must have had a squad and a half of NRL quality forwards. Just, there's so many good back rolls around. And I think with a lot of them, it's almost as much about the situation you put them in and the role you give them because there's so many talented ones out there.
Yeah. I think you guys have released, Leilani Latu. You've released Spencer Leniu. Is he gone?
I think he might have.
Yeah.
I think so.
Obviously, Kurt Capewell, Viliami Kikau, and James Tarmo. There's 5 decent forwards there. It's just the classic Wayne Bennett thing is you don't overpay for your forwards, and he's right there. Except I'd make an exception for Junior Paulo.
There's
a difference.
It was like he said that, and it was like, but the exception was Glenn Lazarus. He overpaid to get him to the Broncos, and for the right reason. There's some of them that are just blue chippers that you just get. It's like, I don't care if he's a forward, I don't care what he costs.
Yeah. The thing with Junior Paulo is there is no prop forward like him in the game, right? You're not seeing any other prop forward pop up in the 5'8" spot and throw a cutout pass at 120 kilos. He's also got the ability to
play the grind game as well.
Exactly.
Which is
pop
really
the offload.
Yeah.
10 meters of carry, physical in defense. He's the complete and utter package for the modern game, and be fit enough to play 60 minutes in this Volandis ball era where the ball doesn't stop. I'm more than happy to pay decently for him. But obviously, the Reid Marnie loss is the big one. It's annoyed me the most because I saw him as a 10-year hooker. Like, he's the guy you build a side around. He should have been the priority and not Gutherson, right? If Ayub wants to mess around in the media and go, I got this offer for Gutho and this offer for Gutho, you go, okay, all right. Is he going to sign it?
Yeah.
If he wants to sign it and it's more money than we're offering, he can do that, but we're going to keep Reid. The other thing is the comments by Brad Arthur saying we're a development club. I mean, that's great. But if you then develop a player and then lose him, what's the point of developing him? You develop players so that you pay under market rate for them when they, mature into first graders, and you try to avoid getting into that bidding war for them because you've got all that that kind of goodwill stored up in them, and also because they've been through your system. That being said, the Bulldogs have offered him obviously a massive deal, but I was still of the opinion that you kind of throw out your wage structure, and apparently we only wanted 3 years and Reid wanted 4. I'm like, hell, pay him the 4 years. Damn it. He's not like 30 and asking for 4 years. He's 23 or something asking for 4 years. You're going to get him when he's in his prime physically. In terms of the deal for Reid, is it good for him money-wise? It's probably set him up for life. Can't argue there. Is it good for his career? Probably not. Let's be honest. The Bulldogs are the reigning wooden spooners, and they've been pretty average the past 3 or 4 seasons. They've gone and paid for a lot of players, but there's not a lot of substance there. Like, you look at it, they've gone and spent huge money on Chotrich. They're trying to get rid of him now. Huge money on Luke Thompson. Decent money on Josh Adokar. They've gone and got Naden. They got Burton. They have, and Dufty, they haven't bought anyone else in the spine. So they bought Kyle Flanagan and then turfed him. They've sacked Lachlan Lewis. They don't have a hooker yet, so obviously that's why they've gone and got Reid. But he's going to come into a side that is going to be, I imagine, very much all over the place come 2023. They're still looking for players, and apparently they don't have a lot of money to do it, obviously, which is why they're trying to offload some players. But, if they're towards the bottom of the table next year, and hopefully Parramatta is in a preliminary final or a grand final next year, I'd imagine Reid he's not going to be able to get out of it, but he might be thinking, I don't know if I made the right decision here. You're gonna go from the penthouse and playing finals football pretty much guaranteed to be scraping to get into the finals for a year or two. He could spend half his contract at the Bulldogs trying to make the finals again.
I guess Matt Burton had the same issue, but like at some point money talks, and I guess
I think Burton, he knew he was behind who he was behind, right? He wants to play in the halves. He's behind the New South Wales and 5/8 halves. He's behind 2 premiership winners, and okay, he won it in the centres, but he obviously wants to play in the halves, and I couldn't begrudge him if I was a Panthers fan going to play in the halves for decent money at the Bulldogs. You know what I mean? He's won a comp now, right?
Yeah.
He's not going, I'm never going to get that again. He's done it. He's won the competition. And I'm not saying he's going to take his foot off the gas when he gets to the Dogs, but in saying that, he's probably in a bit of a better position, but also knowing that, hey, I'm a 100% NRL half when I go to this club, and I'm not fighting for my position like I am at Penrith. That's where I think the difference is there. At Penrith, he was a backup. At the Bulldogs, he's going to be probably leading the team around. And also they've gone and got Kikau, who I honestly think could turn into Tony Williams 2.0. Big money for half a dozen games a year, really.
I don't know if you and me talked about it on the podcast, the last one we did. And I've said it ad nauseum on the podcast. Like, I was talking all year about could it be addition by subtraction at the Panthers with Kikau if they moved him or let him go or, something along those lines. So when he signed with the Bulldogs, I you don't like seeing a player leave a premiership winning team, but
No.
I wasn't heartbroken. I wasn't thinking, oh, that's it for us, because he kind of look, at his best, he can win you a game, but that's how many times a year this year even did we see him at his best. I think he'll be a good buy for the Bulldogs, no doubt. But sometimes I think that you've got to look at the situation for a player, and Penrith's forward pack they're a very grindy sort of forward pack.
He ended up on the bench in the finals.
Yeah. And that, even on the bench, he was all right, but he wasn't at the best that we've seen him either. So it's interesting how players' careers can fluctuate and their situations change because of that. I don't think he's going to end up being a Tony Williams, but I can see where you're going with that. There could be moments where you kind of look at him and say, remember when he was killing everyone,
He's on a 4-year deal too, which tends to be a bit for as players get older and they're on the big money. You see some guys take the foot off the gas at in the middle of their contract when they're not playing for it. You know what I mean? We had that was the accusation towards Michael Jennings, is he only played well in a contract year for us. But in saying that, I would have been interested to know if the Panthers knew Kikau was signing when they released Capewell. Because I can't imagine that if Kikau said, okay, I'm going, I can't imagine that Penrith would have let Capewell go, because I think he suits your style very well.
Yeah, he did, yeah.
Although, unless it was a case of he wanted to go back up to Queensland and that was the selling point for him.
And I would guess the Broncos that paid him pretty good money too, compared to what Penrith were going to, just because they've got so many back rows and things like that. I also think with the Panthers, they're almost moving into that Melbourne Storm category of now that their junior base is actually getting the juniors out of it once again, because it shut down for 8 years under Matthew Elliott. There's always the thing that Penrith knows that just on weight of numbers, the junior base is going to spit out someone that's pretty damn good, and the first graders, and that's my guess with the Panthers, is that they rely on that. They're going to rely on that going forward to a certain extent. So and a lot of clubs can't rely on that. The Bulldogs can't rely on that. Who have the Bulldogs produced in the last 5 or 6 years that's a good junior? No one. So they've got to play for the talent.
I mean, the Eels, I think, are heading towards that as well. They retooled their entire junior system at the end of 2018. So there was that review that looked at the wooden spoon and what happened, and they identified a weakness in the junior setup there. So they completely kind of turned that over, and they're now getting, I think, under 13s in. That's how early they're starting. And, they're not contracted players as such, but they're invited to train as an Eel, so they get all their gear. They play games. I think they actually they play games against Penrith, and they're split north and south. So there's a north catchment where they train at one facility, and a southern catchment which train at another, to make sure that kids can get there. They generally do it over the summer, so kids can get there from home, and it's not a big hike, and all the coaching staff are drawn from the junior district. They're from their local clubs. So you're getting the coaching, those coaches are coached by the NRL coaches, and they're then put into the system to bring through the young guys. And you're starting to see that bear fruit. Hayes Dunster was probably the first of them to come through, and he really grew into his position by the end of the year. I think by the end of the year, he was averaging 130 metres a game or something.
Yeah, he started to be a problem. He started to be a problem for other clubs.
And he's starting to grow into his body too. He only debuted, I think, as a 19-year-old. Very few players are fully grown at that age, and he's starting to really show what he can do. And he's become quite a good finisher as well. He's got fantastic hands. There was a try, I think, against the Titans where he picked it up off his bootlaces at full pace. And you saw Will Passini come through, who looked like he'd been playing in the NRL for the entire season. Came through at the end of the year and stood up Bradman Best, and he really just became this massive handful. He ran over Matt Burton during that finals game. He's a really big physical body. I like the look of him. If he was a bit taller and lankier, he'd remind me a bit of Tamana Tahu, just with his footwork and his skill. And obviously, you got Jake Arthur, who got a few games, I think 6 or 7 games during the season. He's probably not going to be a long-term half for us. We recruited a young bloke from the Dragons, who I think is 18 or 19. So Jake, he's quite tall and lanky, so he could end up filling out into that ball playing back rower role, which would suit him. He's not particularly quick, but you take a guy who's 6'3" and you whack 20 kilos on him, and he's around that 100 kilo mark, like a Bryce Cartwright or a Ryan Madison. They can be quite a good player for you. And we got, as I said, 4 or 5 guys who were in the emerging Blues last season. The player I do like, and I think this may become more of a discussion as next year rolls on, is Ray Stone. And obviously he played hooker for us at a pinch at the end of the season. And I might have said this when we were previewing the Penrith game, but he is a very, I reckon, Brandon Smith-like character in the way he plays. Body on the line every time, incredibly good defender, brutal in defence. He's obviously worked on his dummy half skill quite a lot, and a lot of people picked on him for the mistakes he made in that final game, but I couldn't begrudge him. He's playing in a position that's foreign to him throughout most of his development. Asked to play there after our 3 mainline hookers all go down, and he did a fantastic job for 80% of the time that he was in that position. You see, Damien Cook makes those mistakes, and Api Coruscant makes those mistakes, and Harry Grant makes those mistakes. You can't go off at a guy who's played 2 games at hooker for making some errors when he's buggered. He's not used to playing 80 minutes in the NRL, and he's playing in a finals match. But I really see him as someone that the club, again, he's a junior. We did pinch him off the Tigers, but he played. I'm pretty sure he played Harold Matts for us, or he definitely played a couple of years of under 20s for us. And he's got that ability to come off the bench. You can play him at hooker, play him at lock, and he's very physical. That's what I love about it, is Parramatta have a very physical style of play, and he suits it. And I really see him as someone I think they're going to be working on. And again, Wolford, Ennis at the club, he's got a lot of support to talk to when it comes to working on his hooker play, and I think the Cumberland Throw might have already reported that he's been training that. I get it, it's preseason, everyone's training the house down, but that Ray's putting in some extras in regards to working on his dummy half play. And he's the type of player who's going to probably have to rely on that throughout his career. He's not going to be, your frontline hooker. He's probably never going to be a frontline player. But if he makes himself invaluable coming off the bench, then that can be his position. It's almost like a reverse Mark Riddell in many sense. 15 years ago, he'd probably be the perfect hooker, right? Tackle machine, pretty rugged through the middle of the ruck, can play in the back row if required. Game's changed a bit. You need a bit more nuance around the ruck. You need the ability to pull markers. You need the ability to kick, which obviously Reed does, and we've still got him for next year. And we've got Mitch Rain as well, who's 200 plus games in the NRL, can be very important, particularly towards the back end of the year when, it's crunch time. And if Reed's injured, well, then you've got a very good replacement there. I think the balance next year is going to be good. It's going to be interesting to see what they do in the market in regards to the hooking position, because from what I understand, Mitch is only on a 1-year contract. Mitch Rain, that is. And apparently we're in for Sam Verrills, so that could be quite a good get. The club has shown they can develop players, even if they've started at another club. Hell, we've done that with Murata, we've done that with Ice, we've done that with Bryce Cartwright. Even Makahisi Makatoa, he's had his crack with us. Andrew Davey went off and got a good contract with Manly after he debuted for us. So the club can develop players. So I'm not too worried about that. If we were to get Verrills, I reckon we've got the facilities and the ability to develop a player like Verrills into a very good frontline hooker.
Yeah, and you might look, if there's talk that the Storm will get rid of Brandon Smith early. I don't know about that, but if they do, and Verrills wants to go somewhere else, if you can get him cheaper early on. And I feel like the Roosters would be a club that would say, no, we're not going to pay part of your contract. If you want to leave, you got to leave. But if you can get him early on, get him locked in on an all right contract, that could be a pretty good move for the Eels.
Yeah, we don't have any hookers basically apart from Reed and Mitch next year, from what I understand. Because obviously Joey went and got a contract with St Helens, and I don't think Nathaniel Roach is around next season. I think he's got some injuries. So, you've got two hookers. You really need three. And Verrills is obviously trying to get back to playing consistent footy. So he might jump at the chance to have a crack at a new club, particularly if Brandon Smith comes in. That being said, I'm not sure if Melbourne are really going to cut loose Brandon Smith early. They're not a club that really does that, particularly given how integral he is to their side and the way they play. And we saw that in the finals when he was taken out early against Penrith. They lost a lot of their middle thrust. They lost a lot of their energy and their ruck speed, and obviously Christian Welch as well going off. But I can't see them releasing him early over some swear words on a podcast. let's be honest.
They were saying that in the podcast he said fuck like 61 times and cunt 3 times, and I was thinking,
has Dean Ritchie been around rugby league players at all?
Oh no, he hasn't. That's the answer.
What did you expect?
It's just ridiculous, some of the things that these journos come up with. It's interesting right now the way that the premiership is, because Penrith is a real grindy style of team, and the only thing that worries me about Penrith's style of play is that you can get worn down eventually just because of how physical their game style is. The Storm is the Storm. We all know what they're going to do. I think Manly is going to fall back next year, personally.
It's rare that you have a player like Turbo put two of those years together.
Yeah. And they had a lot of players that were okay players that played out of their skin as well this year.
They got a bit of the 09 Eels about them, really. They're relying on one player's brilliance. They've got probably some better frontline players, Daly Cherry Evans, Trbojevic, Jake and Marty Tapau, obviously. But, I think you'll see them come back to the pack a little bit. Plus, teams will work out. If you kick the turbo on the full or into a corner, there was a stat, I think, from Jack Snape, something like he basically contributed 3 line breaks or line breaks assists across the entire season if you kick to him and force him to return the ball.
And I think you saw that in the finals, and towards the end of the year, teams had worked that out. Yeah. That's the thing about the NRL, is that to do what you do well back to back and it actually work is really difficult, because you've got 15 other coaches that are trying to work it out and working out ways to shut you down. It's like, the Roosters are a club that the thing that worries me about the Roosters, and let's pretend they even get Brandon Smith, is that there is 10 players or so that are leaving that team. And once again, you basically, you're tossing up an entire lineup once again that's coming into the season. And I think that will have an effect on them. They're obviously a pretty well-run club, so that they'll get through that better than most. But it's got to have an effect on them. And that means, when you're looking at it, the Eels, if they just do what they did this year, they'll be in an all right position. They should be a top 4 team. They really should.
So the thing I'm mostly worried about actually is our wingers. So obviously Ferguson left because we weren't going to pay him $500,000 a year for another 2 years, which is fine. $500,000 a year. Fergo was good at the end of the year, but his body's starting to go. He was carrying every injury from the looks of it. But Maika Sivo, he's 30 and he's dealing with an ACL. Obviously Hayes Dunster has come through, but that other position is really up in the air. There's talk of Bailey Simonson, which he could be all right for us, because we particularly like the big-bodied backs. That's the way we like to play, and very similar to Penrith in that regard. Like the big carries out of the back early in the sets, first 3-4 carries from your backs. That being said, Will Penasini and Wonga Blake took a monster of work at the end of the season during the finals. I think both of them were well over 100 meters for all those games, just doing the work of an extra winger, an extra forward. But yeah, there's probably Sean Russell might have first crack if we don't recruit someone. He's not a bad option, but he's originally a fullback who's been converted into a winger. Or there's Samuel Loizu, who they're not sure where to play him, to be honest with you. Mm-hmm. He's played a bit of fullback, played in the halves, played in the back line. And then there's also Solomoni Noduki, I think, who's a young Fijian guy they've got. He played the trial match against the Dragons at the start of the year, but he'll be coming through a bit more. I'm not sure how much reserve grade he played this season, or if he was kind of seen more as a flag player at under 21s level. But
see, that's what you do with wingers. You fly to Fiji, you get off the plane, you point to the nearest Fijian male, and you say, you're going to play on the wing in the NRL. And they can all play as superstar wingers in the NRL. It is amazing.
Yeah, you just got to go to a local rugby match and just pick up one of them.
Yeah.
So we've got some options. Again, most of those options are juniors, unless we buy someone. I'd still like to buy someone who's got NRL experience, just for the fact of you're going to have a young back line. Like, you're going to have Penasini, you're going to have Dunstan. I think combined the pair have 12 or 13 NRL games. You obviously got Tom Opacek, he's an out-and-out centre. And you've got Wonga Blake, who, there's been talk of him playing on the wing because he tends to not pass the ball anyway. Mm-hmm. So if you stick him on the wing, what's the difference? Mm-hmm. He's tall, he's fast, he's great in the air. So you can stick him on the wing and stick Opacek next to him and just feed him the ball. You've got your wing position sorted. It's whether or not he wants to play there. But again, kind of what I said is there's a bit of that junior system coming through, and they're probably looking at blooding some young guys again next year, which is great. I always like seeing juniors come through. This talk of teams don't develop talent anymore. I think Parramatta did it for a while. They're similar to Penrith, right? They regressed, and after Brian Smith left, and the junior system was left to crumble. But they've done a lot of work to bring through juniors now, and I think we're going to start seeing it. I also think, and unfortunately I'm agreeing with Phil Gould here, sometimes you see a bit more of a connection between the players and the supporters when that player has come through as a teenager and knows your club inside and out.
Yeah.
They understand what the club is about. I think we've started to see a bit of that with Will Penasini, really talking about what it's been like coming through and playing in the NRL for Parramatta. I'm a big fan of local grown players because as someone who watches a lot of our junior competitions and always keeps an eye on them, it's always great seeing a guy come through over a 3 or 4 year period and watching him go from a 16, 17-year-old to playing in the NRL for Parramatta. And we're getting that again. But I also pull that from the other sports I watch. I'm a Liverpool supporter, so you watch Trent Alexander-Arnold running around at Anfield now in his 20s, and he was in the junior system as like an 8 or 9-year-old. It's kind of awesome.
That's what makes it so insane that you've had people in the media pushing for a draft. And it's like, you people are stupid, especially in a year where we saw the Panthers win with so many juniors in their team, and you saw like cars lined up going past players' houses in Penrith. And it's like, how can you celebrate all of that stuff? And then a week later you're saying, well, we need to get rid of all of that and have a draft. It's madness.
If you had a draft, there'd be a couple of things. First of all, you'd have to blow up the entire junior system because you're not going to get Penrith or Parramatta going, yeah, we'll develop a bunch of players. It's going to cost us a bunch of money and then someone else can have them. They're not going to do that.
No.
Second of all, a draft doesn't solve incompetency.
Yes,
right?
Exactly.
You can look to the NFL and you go, the New York Jets draft Sam Darnold as their quarterback 2 seasons ago. I think it was 3 seasons ago. They couldn't coach him to save their life, and then they cut him. Mm-hmm. It's like, that's not that's everything wrong with a draft, right? He went to a poorly performing team and was expected to fix all their problems overnight, And then when he didn't, they traded him. Like, that is what would happen in the NRL. Like, you take Nathan Cleary, for argument's sake, and go back to 2017 or 2016 when he would have been nominated for the draft, right? And instead of playing for Penrith and coming through at the system there and playing alongside Peter Wallace and learning his craft there, he would have been drafted by bloody Newcastle, right? Who were a basket case at the time.
Yeah.
How does that help him?
Exactly.
Like, how does that help him become a better player if he ends up at a club that is struggling and doesn't have the facilities and doesn't have the infrastructure around those types of players to get the best out of them? Like, we've seen it with Kalen Ponga at Newcastle. Okay, they went and bought Mitchell Pearce to help take some of the load off, but he was bought and they're like, well, he's not winning us all the games. It's like, well, yeah, because the players around him aren't at the level that need to be to get the best out of Kalen Ponga. And then there's like, well, do we play him at fullback? Do we play him at halves because he's got to get his hands on the ball more? It's kind of like, well, if you got some half-decent halves, and they've obviously released Mitchell Pearce now, and they're banking on Clifford and possibly Kurt Mann or something, but they're probably not the players that Kalen Ponga needs to show everything he can do. He'll win them games, and he's done that before, but you're very much looking at like a Jared Haynes sort of situation where brilliant player in an average team who can win games off his own back, but he's not going to do it every week, and he's going to cop it for that because, he's the $1 million player. That's where I see a draft heading, and I don't think that's the best way to look after your junior players. And like you said as well, there's something nice about seeing guys that were born and grew up in the area playing for their local clubs.
Yeah.
And I think you're also going to see that in NRLW. I know Parramatta's fullback, Batil Vede Welsh, she's originally from New Zealand, but she moved to Parramatta 10 years ago. She basically grew up in the local area, had to go to the Roosters and then St. George to play in the NRLW. And then as soon as Parramatta approached her, she signed on the dotted line going, I want to come home. I want to play where I grew up. I want to play near my friends and near my family. And that's where the big benefit is of having a junior system. Plus,
yeah, and like for a young player to still have this support system around them as well.
Exactly.
It's huge. And you look at all of the issues that happen with young sportsmen and women these days, where when you take them away from their support system, how it can all fall apart very, very quickly and very, very badly. I can't believe that anybody at all would look at what a draft brings to competitions and say, oh, yeah, we want some of that in our competition. And really what they really want is the TV show, the draft TV show. That's all I want.
Yeah, they want some extra TV during the off season, and they want a big event. And it's not in rugby league's DNA. And whilst I'm always careful to go, well, that's not a rugby league thing, because quite often that's bullshit. It's not really a rugby league thing to have a draft when you consider that the majority of I'm pretty sure most rugby league competitions are all based around junior development and bringing through the next line of kids to represent your club, because they're entirely based on their junior system. That's where they come from. They come from some guys growing up in the area and wanting to play for you, because you think back to the 80s and you had import rules. You couldn't import more a certain number of players that were from outside your district. Because it was all about the local teams. I'm not saying we go back to that at all, but I think it's also a way, the junior system is also a way for clubs like Parramatta was a few years ago, and I could see it occurring at the Tigers if they get their house in order. It's a way to catch up to the better teams, right? If you invest correctly,
it helps your salary cap.
Exactly.
Like if you've got 3 or 4 young players on their very first professional contracts, you might be saving like $500,000 a year.
Exactly. That's where I was heading with that. If you do it properly, you can be essentially underpaying for some very good players. And because you've developed them, it's going to cost another club a lot more to poach them off you. And okay, that might happen. We've just seen that happen. But you can also get some very good years out of them before they're commanding that 600,000, 700,000, 800,000 a year. And it's money for nothing, right?
Yeah.
I, as an Eels fan, go, hey, what about a transfer fee? The Bulldogs can give us an extra $100,000 for Reid. And and that $100,000 could go towards, a couple of development contracts for some young guys. But that's a debate for another time.
Yeah.
But I also think.
Sorry, go on.
I also think that with this entire discussion around recruitment and retention, the sky isn't falling at Parramatta. Every team loses players. We've been through Melbourne and Penrith. They've lost 5 or 6 players each. Souths, they cut their halfback. Right? They cut their club captain, their Redfern Jr., right? The guy that basically led them to the finals. And everyone said, Latrell's gone, they're not going to make finals. And whilst a lot was made of Cody Walker, it was Adam Reynolds' kicking game on one leg, basically, that got them to the finals. And Cody took over, and we saw the big gap between Cody and Adam in terms of their kicking games. And, there's barely been a peep since then. Reynolds signed with the Broncos. He's up at Red Hill now. And all the focus is on Parramatta losing Reid Marnie in 12 months' time, whilst Souths are banking their future on a rookie halfback who played fullback for them this season.
The thing is too, it's a player, and we've seen it with Parramatta, Penrith, Melbourne in particular. It's players that are going from top clubs to lower table clubs, and they're being forced out generally by the salary cap, whether teams chose to offer less money or they tried to undercut them as much as they could because they're trying to keep, as much salary cap space as possible. And it's like, the system's working. Why is everyone whinging?
Yeah. The thing with, they lowballed Reid or they lowballed Papali'i, I'm like, you always hear players and managers say, well, it's a business.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it works two ways, right? The club's got to try and get as much bang for buck as possible.
Mm-hmm.
It's no use tabling a $600,000 deal straight up because the player will just reject it, right? They'll go, well, they've offered me $650, right? Then you end up in a high stakes bidding war, probably overpaying, right? So it goes both ways. The player can ask for $800,000, the club can go, we think you're worth $600,000, right? You then you haggle in between there to find the price, but. Yeah, players move all the time, and it's not the end of the world if one player leaves the club because of the salary cap, because they've asked for more money than the club can afford. Because everyone sees it in a 1 or 2 year window, and most clubs operate a lot further down the road than that. They're not planning 1 or 2 years ahead. They're planning 3, 4, 5 years ahead because they need to get the salary cap in order for them. Right? If you don't do that, you end up in a hole.
Exactly. And look, it's the West Tigers with Papali is the great example of it. They need to pay for talent, and they need to pay a lot of money for talent.
Yep.
And if they don't do it, they just end up being what the West Tigers have been for the last 10 years, just nowhere.
That happened to us in 2013 and 2014, right? With Anthony Watmo paying through the nose for him, and then it turned out we'd use a bunch of illegal TPAs to get him. Right, that's what you end up doing, and you either end up at the bottom of the ladder, or you end up blowing up your squad because your salary cap's screwed, in 2 or 3 years' time because you physically can't afford the guys.
That's what worries me about the Bulldogs, and they've made a lot of high-profile recruitments, and you just got to look at the quality of the players. A lot of these players, you can't argue about the quality of them. And I remember when Phil Gould first got to Penrith. He started bringing in players, but then he started getting players to leave as well. And Penrith started, Reagan Campbell-Gillard's a great example. I think Penrith have just stopped paying him. They might even have been paying him this year. And it's a really, really, really bad way to get your system going. Now, I think the thing with Penrith is that they took more control away from Gould, and that steadied the ship. And then that obviously they got rid of Gould, having him come in, and then all of a sudden he's spending all this money on players. That worries me about the Bulldogs situation.
Yeah. My dad said the same thing. He said you looked at what he did at Penrith. He came in, he signed a bunch of players for a lot of money, and then he started cutting players. And you look at Michael Jennings, he cut him. You look at Luke Lewis, got rid of him, and Luke Lewis went on to have a fantastic end of his career. He won a comp. He was like a first pick for New South Wales. Is a really, really good player at the end of his career, and the Panthers had cut him, and they forked out big money on Reagan Campbell-Gillard, and after a year or two of that went, that was a bad idea. Here, we'll pay $250,000 a year for you to play against us. which it's kind of worked out for them, but it also cruelled their 2019 season when they had the Tyrone May scandal, and a lot of them said, they put it down to that, and I think it was also just an unhappy time at the club with the upheaval with Phil Gould around the club, obviously in some kind of war with the board.
What I think will be the next thing that will happen, and it won't happen really quickly, but eventually Gould is gonna get rid of Barrett because that's just what he does.
I'm not sure because I've heard him talk so highly of Barrett for the past couple of years.
Yeah, but Barrett will get tired like Ivan Cleary did.
Yeah, I bet you Ivan's real tired after that premiership he's won.
Oh, very, very tired.
Yeah. That was hilarious saying Ivan's tired and Ivan goes off and starts coaching again. Like, don't think he's that tired. So the other question I've got about the Bulldogs, and I'm not here to shit on the Bulldogs really.
No.
I don't like them because they're a rival of ours and they're a big rival of ours. Yeah. But in saying that, they've got a big year next year, particularly with Trent Barrett, right? If they don't really turn it around, and I'm talking like they're going to be up above 12th spot really to consider it a turnaround really. There's going to be a lot of pressure on him to retain his job because he's going to have some extra players. He's going to have Josh Adokar and Burton and Naden. And obviously Luke Thompson's going to have another season, another preseason under his belt, the NRL. They're going to have to start winning more often and not losing abjectly like they did last season. And would they go 3 weeks or something without scoring a point? Coaches very rarely survive that.
And look, Trent Barrett, for his entire NRL coaching career, which he was always talked about as being the next great coach, he's never proven that he can really coach. And
he's never had a winning season, and he had a decent side at Manly.
Yeah. And so it's really like he's got talent now, and there's going to be fewer and fewer excuses. And look, I don't rate him as a coach at all, and I'm just going by his record. It's nothing special, but I think eventually you get somebody in like a Phil Gould who you say, we want you to come in and make changes. Eventually the change ends up being the coach, and especially when you get a former coach in that you're asking to make those changes, because former coaches look at everything and they say, you know what? If I was coaching this side, I think the problem's the coach because I would do things differently. And it's just what happens. It's human nature.
It's going to be an interesting dynamic too, because I'm pretty sure Barrett played under Gould at Origin level.
He did.
And he was under Gould at Penrith when Barrett first retired and became a lower grade coach and started his coaching career. So Gould's
that's where he became the architect.
Which is obviously why Gould's talked him up so much, because it's a reflection on him, right? If Barrett doesn't succeed here, Gould won't be taking any credit for Barrett becoming a coach like he is at the moment. It's a similar thing with Penrith, right? When the club was struggling, it wasn't Gould's problem. The moment they win a premiership, it's because Gus implemented the junior system, regardless of the fact he'd left 3 years earlier. And Ivan Cleary was the same coach that he'd sacked. I think the other thing, and bring it back to Parramatta as well, I think the blow up you've seen, particularly on Twitter, but also elsewhere, is the lack of a premiership in the past 40 years. I don't think all of this is as intense if the club had have won in 2009 or 2005 or in 2001, because there would have been a recent-ish win for them to look back on. For a lot of supporters, such as myself, never seen a premiership. I've seen us play 2 grand finals. That's it. So the idea that we'd be losing a player who could always win that drought-breaking comp is very, very hard to take. And I think it also rankles fans a bit when you hear clubs, and I'm not saying the clubs are wrong, but I think there's still that little bit of a misunderstanding from some management, and this occurs in all clubs too, when they talk about, we're going through our process, or we're doing this, or we feel the losses as hard as the fans. It kind of feels like, stop pissing in my pocket and telling me it's raining, because do you really understand what it's like to support this club? Because I grew up with this club. It's the only club I've ever supported. It's the club my grandfather supported. It's the club my dad supports. It's the club my son supports. on the hill before they had seating at Parramatta Stadium. My grandfather went to Cumberland Oval when there was the track that ran around it, the old dirt track. I've got, my dad went to the 76 grand final, our first ever grand final. We've been waiting for a premiership for 40 years, and we've seen hundreds of players come and go in that time. So for me, it's nothing new. But in saying that, there is beginning to get a real impatience around the club going, when is it going to happen? It's not quite desperation, but it's very much like that, well, when's it going to happen? The only person I'd say in the club who would understand that is probably Brad Arthur, because his family history goes back to the start of the club. They've been supporting that club since 1947. And he was a junior player for us before he went to the bush and was a captain coach out there. I'd say Brad understands it. I don't think that the management fully understands it, because, again, they come in, they do their job, and they're doing it quite well. I've got nothing against the board or the executive. I think the club's profitable. It's running pretty well in terms of sponsorship and marketing, in all the off-field facets. Hell, when's the last time you heard about a boardroom blow-up at Parramatta? It's been a while now.
A few years for the Eels is a long time too.
And there's Leagues Club elections next year, right? And there's been a little bit of agitation from some people who wanted to get on the board and didn't, but nothing like there used to be. So in that respect, they're doing their job. But I also think that as a fan, there is that impatience about, well, when's the comp coming? When's the drought break? And I can kind of see it as it'd be very similar to when Jack Gibson coached the side in 81. You're going to see we're not going to burn the stadium down. We like the stadium. We don't need a new one. But it's probably going to be bigger than what Penrith had this year. It's one of the more storied premiership droughts. It's getting very close to what Souths went through. Hopefully we don't end up anywhere near what the Melbourne Demons ended up with their 70-year drought or whatever it was. I would very much like to see a premiership before my son's grown up and moved out. But that is what fans want. And I've spoken to people at the club, and I completely understand with where they're coming from, going, we're managing our cap into the future. We're trying to ensure that, if we unveil that next big boom kid, right, who can rip up a competition on his own, that we've got him, and we don't let him walk, because that becomes the next story, that Parramatta let this genius player walk. I can understand that. But in saying that, fans don't care, right? Fans don't care what you've got planned 3 years down the track. They care about wins. Yes. And they want those wins yesterday. And that goes for pretty much every club apart from Penrith right now, because you won the comp.
And look, there comes a point where even if you're close to it all, even if if you think the bounce of the ball, a couple of injuries go our way, a couple of players of ours don't get injured, man, it could have been us. If you're that close, eventually sometime you're going to get fans going, stop talking about it and just do it.
Yeah. Like whenever they go, we're having a crack at the premiership, and it's like, well, no shit. Yeah. What else are you doing? I felt this very much with Liverpool coming into the 2019-20 season. We'd missed the league by a point the previous season. We'd won 3 big trophies, but we didn't have the 30-year drought trophy that we were chasing. And then, of course, COVID hit before we technically won the comp. And, we're sitting there for whatever it was, 6 or 7 weeks without playing a game and going, we need whatever it was, like 8 points to seal the competition with a 25-point gap on our nearest rival. And I just remember it was relief when Chelsea beat Man City and we were mathematically the champions. We couldn't be beaten. It wasn't elation. It was just relief. Like, this is done. And up until that point, it's like, when's it going to happen? I think there was a little bit more, not as much restlessness once we'd won that Champions League, like the first trophy got over the line, and it was a big one. The restlessness dropped off, and you don't have that in rugby league anymore. I spoke to Steve Edge last year, and he said the big thing for him when he came to Parramatta in 1980 from St George, he said we won the Tooth Cup that year under John Peard, who was coach. And he said that was the start of our 4 consecutive grand finals and the 3 consecutive premierships. It showed us we could win, and we had some silverware in the cabinet. And he said for a lot of those younger guys, the guys like Sterling and Kenny and Growth and Ella, who I don't think had won anything at Parramatta at that stage, he said that was big for them to know they could play a competition and win it.
And that's like, part of me loves that about the NRL, that it's all or nothing. And I think that's something that made this year's premiership pretty special. And obviously I think that as a Panthers fan, in that the Storm beat them last year and they were a young team, and you had to think about, look, they did so much last year. Can they do that again and then go better? And they actually managed to. They actually managed to prove they could win it. And there's a scenario where they lose this year's grand final and they've got a monkey around their neck or a monkey on their back that's like gigantic. If they hadn't won this year, that could have been crippling. And luckily they won it. And that knowing that you can get the job done is really important to a player. And, you know, in some ways Origin helps with that. We get that out of Origin and international football when we're able to play international football. But because the NRL is all or nothing, it's, you know, there's only a few teams that can go into a season and say, oh, yeah, we know we can do the job. Melbourne's one of them. Yeah, I dare say the Roosters, just as an organisation, are one of them. And Penrith is really the only other one that you could probably go into next season and say, well, we know these teams definitely can get the job done. And I feel as though everyone else, even South Sydney, it's been a while since they won the premiership. Everyone else is like, oh, I don't know if we can actually do it with what we've got.
I think the loss of Adam Reynolds is going to be the big one there. They've lost the guy who won the comp at Souths, and he knows, you know, what to do there. And plus Wayne Bennett too. You know, I think that was the big thing for Penrith to do in the grand final was to beat a Wayne Bennett coach side who, you know, Wayne's been there and done that. He wasn't going to be intimidated, and you know, both sides slugged it out for a huge chunk of that game right until the end. They were into each other. And it was because I think, you know, well, Ivan Cleary had been to 2 grand finals and lost both of them. You know, once as the player, once as a coach before that. And obviously the majority of that Penrith side had lost the year before. And you could see that kind of learning on the job, essentially, against Melbourne the year before, learning this is what it takes to win a competition. I think had Parramatta got bundled out by Penrith convincingly, there'd be a lot more concern about next season. But I think the fact that, kind of like you said, you know, certain couple of calls go our way, or you know, we actually have a hooker. No, I think that was the big one. Right? You actually have a hooker and you don't have a back rower filling in there. The game is different. You know, they say, you know, you say it all the time, but rugby league is a gain of centimeters, and the little bits at the end of that season that bounce one way, a certain call one way can change a match or help a team get over the line. And the other thing that I think is Parramatta know they belong in the finals now, and they've been there 3 years in a row. And the biggest thing about finals is just being there, right? You get used to playing in that type of cauldron. You get used to playing where everything's on the line. And they've had to do it from the ground up. You know, they had to start from basically scratch because they hadn't been in the finals for, I think it was 8 or 9 years when Brad took over. By the time they made the finals in 2017. And I think you've seen Mitchell Moses grow into a pretty damn good halfback. And you could kind of see after he came back from that back injury against Newcastle, he took that game on. He scored that try just before halftime where he sliced them open from about 40 metres out and just beat Ponga to the line. He just decided he was winning that game. And it was his kicking game that ended up killing Newcastle. And again, he got into a big kicking duel with Nathan Cleary. And okay, Mitch lost his game of Origin, but he got to experience Origin at Suncorp Stadium and learn what it's like to be an Origin player. And so, you know, you've got Junior Paulo who's also played Origin. You've got Regan Campbell-Gillard's played Origin. Clint Gutherson's played Origin. Reid Marnie's been consistently, I think, in the Maroon squad for the past 2 seasons. So you're getting guys that are used to playing at that higher level.
And that belief that they belong there too. Like
exactly.
That's huge that was huge for Penrith this year, in that last year going against the Storm, they're like, oh, it's the Melbourne Storm. This year they were like, we belong to here, and I think that was as much a part of them winning everything as any other factor.
Yeah, 100%. And you saw a similar thing with the Eels when they beat Melbourne twice during the regular season.
Mm-hmm.
They've now beaten them 3 times out of the last 4. That's insane. No one has a 75% win rate against Melbourne, particularly in the past couple of years where they've been basically unstoppable during the regular season. And you look back 2 years, you looked at the end of 2019 when Melbourne beat them, I think it was 32-0 in that finals game. You fast forward 2 years and Parramatta is grinding Melbourne out of matches.
Mm-hmm.
They learn over the past couple of years, to be the best, you've got to be prepared to win it at death. You're not going to win through 1 or 2 miracle plays, and you're not going to win by just some brilliance. If you truly want to win at the end of the season, it's going to take everything you've got, and it's going to take everyone in the squad too.
Yeah,
that's the big thing I think you're seeing now, particularly in the past 3 or 4 years. Teams relying more on their squad. There's that whole thing where if you have more than 30 players, you're done. Well, I'm not sure on the stats of it recently, but there's a lot more players getting rested. There's a lot more players getting asked to play when they normally wouldn't have played. Obviously we rolled out into the Wales Cup side at the end of the season, but even Penrith, you guys had all those guys in Origin, and you had to play against the Tigers, I think with 7 or 8 guys missing. Okay, you got done, but you got guys now who have played NRL who previously wouldn't have.
Yeah, it's and I also think that with teams looking to manage the amount of kilometres basically that especially forwards are putting into their legs, I think that's a big key too, and I think that's why it's important to have almost a squad of forwards. Which is what we saw out of Penrith this year, and that worked really well for them. Look, it's been a really good podcast. Thank you for coming on. I was so excited when you messaged me and said, "Hey, let's do a podcast about the Eels situation," because I was so ready to talk about what was going on at the Eels.
Yeah.
Tell us where we can find you, what you're up to, and anything you want to promote. The floor is yours.
Sweet. So just quickly, let us let you know. So in terms of how big this has been for One Ideal, in the past month, we've had 30,000 people onto the site. And in the past week, we've had, let's bring it up here for you. We've had 13,000 people on the site in the past week. Now, we normally get, 40,000 people visiting the site during the season. Yeah. We've had days in the past week where we've had 5,000 people jumping online, which is like Parramatta playing finals game day level of traffic. So it's been insane, the amount of people visiting the site and just the overall traffic on there. So I'm over at OneIdeal, OneIdeal.com. That's your Eels fan site. So if you're an Eels fan, you want to have your thoughts on Parramatta, anyone can post a comment or post a blog on there. You can just sign up. Sign up's free. I approve you. So if you go, hey, I can't comment immediately, that's why we're trying to stop some bots and some spam jumping through there. So you can oneideal.com. I'm also over at Rugby League Monthly, which is your online digital magazine, which gets published on the 1st of each month. I've got some really interesting stuff coming up tomorrow. So we're recording on the 30th. So the 1st of December, I've got an interesting chat with Matt Strama, who was the Titans hooker for a bit. And I also took a deep dive into a former Eastern Suburbs player who joined a Sydney Razor gang in the 1920s. So, he ended up getting gangland murdered, which was really interesting. So you can jump on there, rugbyleaguemonthly.com. And your first month's free if you wanted to go monthly. If you want to go yearly, you get a month off. There'll probably be some Christmas specials coming up in the next couple of weeks. So you can jump over there, sign up. It's rugbyleaguemonthly.com /subscriptions and get your fix of rugby league content.
That's awesome. And I would say to everyone, do it because, you create some fantastic content and we've got to support independent content creators in rugby league, because they're far better than what we get out of mainstream media. And also oneeyedeal.com, like that's the place to go. If you're an Eels fan, go and join everybody that's there right now. There's more people turning up there than turn up to West Tigers games. So go and have a chat about your team. Talk about the wins. That's something West Tigers fans can't do either. And, it'll be awesome. And you do it, and you've got that awesome stadium to go to, which is something the West Tigers don't have either. So
yeah, they tried to. Not their jungle.
Hashtag our jungle. How funny was that? That was adorable.
Yeah.
Look, thank you for coming on. We'll have you on soon again. I'm looking forward to the pre-season when we all start lining our teams up and we know who's finally everywhere, and January is over, so obviously the West Tigers recruitment is over by then, and it's going to be interesting to see how this following season comes. Let's just hope we can all go to games. Hey,
yeah, that'd be great. Obviously missed half a season this year and half a season last year, so
yeah. Hey, did you see the All-Star game is at Parramatta Stadium?
Yes, I saw that today.
Yeah, how good's that? I'm thinking I might end up having to go to that one if we can actually attend it.
Well, they said Eels members are apparently getting pre-sale tomorrow. So
really?
I'll have to, I think it's 9 a.m. or something. Eels members get first crack at tickets. I think probably because our home ground, and obviously we didn't get to watch much footy there, but hopefully they get a sellout because it'd be fantastic to go and see those games.
Yep.
I'm actually really interested in going now because I get a bit jealous watching them play it up in Queensland or wherever they've played it recently. It just looks like a fantastic occasion to watch footy. But also, it's been quite a while since I've got to watch some live footy. So coming on to something like that would be really interesting to kick off the season.
Oh, look, I'd like just going to anything at Parramatta Stadium. I love it. I just hope that with the Panthers' new stadium, they basically just go copy-paste. That would just do me. I'd be happy with that. Paint the bloody thing black. That's all I need to do.
Well, you can get your nice LEDs around the side like we've got, and it just, you can set it to like black with your that multicolour strip around the stadium that you guys run through the middle of your jersey.
How weird is it that those colours, like if somebody said make a jersey with these colours, you're going to have these colours in stripes, and you would think, well, that's going to look like a dog's breakfast. But some weird way it works. It's really weird.
Yeah.
So strange.
And then you would look at St. George and look at their away kit and you go, how can you screw up red and white?
That's so true. How can St. George have red and white jerseys that look so far worse than green and red at South Sydney?
Yeah, I know. Or the crazy. Warriors who have got like blue and then red, green and white.
Yeah. Oh, it's so weird when teams. You know what? Every single Broncos jersey I've seen of theirs from the last 20 years just reminds me of Caramello Koalas. Like, I don't know what it is.
The teal one, right?
Oh, apart from the teal one, not many teams can do teal. I understand the Titans do teal pretty well. Like, their jerseys aren't too bad, but every other club that's tried teal should just stop.
Yeah. Stick to your traditional colours.
Thank you for coming on. Thank you for everyone for listening. We continue right through the off-season. There's no off-season here at Fergo and the Freak. That's why we win awards, even if they are for the logo. So thank you for coming on, Elliott. And thank you to everyone for listening. Bye-bye.